All right, welcome everybody. It is another episode with the Spacetech Visionaries, and we have a fantastic guest joining us. Annalisa Gitani, welcome on the platform. It's nice to have you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Now, before we go into Annalisa's profile, I've also got my co-host Jim Green and John, who has just come from Singapore, and apparently it was not hot at all. I'm just saying that, and we'll find out more about it. But what I'm going to do, Jim, is set the stage, or let you set the stage. I'm going to play this video. So this episode, everybody, on remote sensing, Earth observation, and how it works with climate change, and then we'll take Jim's thoughts and then we'll take it from there. So here we go.
Five Copernicus missions are currently in orbit, providing a huge amount of data that we can use to make our world better.
We work to assist ship owners and operators to find solutions to diminish their environmental impact. In particular, we work on assessing the interest of adding wind-assisted ship propulsion systems on board merchant ships.
Notre solution est basée sur l'exploitation des images satellites Sentinelle-2 et Sentinelle-3 du programme Copernicus, dans le but de suivre et anticiper les paramètres de la qualité de l'eau sur le site du chantier de Port-la-Nouvelle. Les données ont permis d'améliorer les connaissances du fonctionnement hydrosédimentaire du site avant le chantier, et pendant le chantier, elles ont complété le dispositif de suivi in situ en apportant une vision grande échelle.
All right, I'm going to pause it there. Jim, we've looked at remote sensing, Earth observation. Everybody's been talking about it. How important is it to climate, and how did the whole origin story with climate start?
Well, Copernicus is indeed extremely important and wonderful addition to the set of satellites that are up there now that are dedicated to really studying the environment and seeing how it changes. Now, this is a really complex environment where wind and water and land interact in very complicated ways. Plus, as we go around the sun, we're actually in a slightly elliptical orbit. So we receive more or less light from the sun over time and seasons. So all these effects are folded into really trying to understand what's happening to our climate over time. And as it moves forward, what will it happen in terms of its habitability to this planet? But the real origin story of climate change begins at the beginning of the space age, where we had the Russian Space Agency, which at the time was Soviet Space Agency, and the NASA Space Agency, going from planet to planet, making some initial observations. And what we were finding out about Venus, which if you were in the era before the space era, your thoughts on Venus were set by Edgar Rice Burroughs, a habitable planet. It might be hot, more jungle-like. Well, the reality turns out to be that it's not habitable to humans at all on the surface. It's a huge pressure of the atmosphere, plus the temperature is hot enough to melt lead. We're just not going to be able to roam around on that planet at all. All the spacecraft that try to go land have had major problems, or have only worked for a handful of minutes, an hour at the most. Well, what happened next was trying to understand why that planet is the way it is. Yes, it's closer to the sun than we are. It gets twice the amount of light that we do from the sun. And how has that affected its climate? And it turns out the modelers ended up realizing that carbon dioxide, which dominated the atmosphere, is a wonderful greenhouse gas. Now, what that means is, okay, we call it greenhouse because if you walk into a greenhouse where you've got plants and you've got glass rooms where the light comes in, and as the light heats things up, the heat is not allowed to escape, and that just builds up a heat until there's an equilibrium that occurs. But that's why it's hotter inside a greenhouse than outside the greenhouse. Same basic concept in that is CO2 gets sunlight, absorbs that when it becomes infrared after it heats the surface of the planet and doesn't let it go. And so consequently, the temperature rises until an equilibrium comes into play. We then found out that's a greenhouse gas that, we have that on this planet. What will happen as our greenhouse gas changes over time? And what are those greenhouse gases? So those modelers that were modeling the atmosphere of Venus came to the Earth, and they began to run their codes. And I was at Goddard Space Flight Center when these modelers were running their big codes and really, in the late 80s and 90s and getting unbelievable results, because what's happening is we recognize that the Earth actually has 3 main greenhouse gases. Water vapor is the top greenhouse gas. Water vapor, CO2, and then methane. Actually, it's methane and then CO2. But methane doesn't last very long in the atmosphere. So really between water vapor and CO2 are those things that we want to watch. But methane's still important to find out where it's being generated and how that might affect our climate. And the modelers indicated that this planet was warming up faster than what we would expect as the planet evolves, And so that brought in the concept of climate change. And so consequently, discovered by the space age, now we have the opportunity to monitor this planet in new and unique ways. What's fascinating to me, of course, is the concept of climate change turns out to be, down to parameters that affect our temperature. Are we moving to a Venus-like environment where we can't survive? And so monitoring and understanding what the temperature is really a critical parameter. So if you wanted to do that, you want to get an average temperature of the Earth every year. You can imagine a grid on the Earth, and every point on the grid you'd have a thermometer, and it would make a measurement every half hour, and then you do that day after day to a whole year, average all that data up, and you'd get the average temperature of the Earth. Well, we can't do that. We've got polar caps and we've got oceans, and, we can't put an array of thermometers out there, but we can do it from a spacecraft or a series of spacecraft. So that enables us to crunch all that data down into one number, and we report out, NOAA and NASA work together and report out every year what that temperature is. And guess what? It's going up. And so the big discussions then become, where is it going? What is the effect of that? And can we, through a variety of ways and approaches, using modern technologies, new techniques, begin the process of slowing that increased rate down and perhaps getting it to a point where we can level it off? And that's the exciting part of where we are today. We need all kinds of resources to be able to do that. So the monitoring Annalisa does, and the analysis is critical. Tools where because it's a mountain of data with artificial intelligence, have to come in and help us do that analysis. So very exciting time.
Well, Annalisa, you're the Secretary General of URISI. Tell us about the organization. John, I'd love for you to follow up with that, with where AI and even virtual reality would play a part, because I see it playing a part. So, Annalisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. And first of all, let me say that it's always so interesting to see, what Jim has to say. In a couple of minutes, he managed to do I don't know, Lectio Magistralis, as we say, on how the definition of climate change has been introduced, on our daily lives. So thank you very much, Jim. It's always great. And so on me and on the association that you are indeed showcasing. So I am the Secretary General of EURISI. EURISI is an association of space agencies. So we gather national space agencies and governmental offices dealing with space affairs across Europe and beyond. So we have, of course, ESA and major European national space agencies, but also Morocco, Turkey, and other countries that are I mean, like neighboring Europe geographically, and that have like a strong interest to cooperate. And what we do is basically we've been mandated to bridge the gap between space and society. So we do a lot of this promotion of what are the benefits of satellite-based application. And then we work a lot as matchmakers. So of course, like we are in a very privileged position between like service providers and users communities. So we do a lot of this work of matchmaking. And I mean, climate change or environmental issues has been for sure like one of the major topics that we've been addressing ever since I joined the association, because indeed it's as Jim was mentioning, it's something that now we have data. It's real. It's happening. Actually, 2024 has been, according to Copernicus, the hottest summer. We cannot say ever, but we can say since we have data that allow us to compare. So basically, since this kind of monitoring has started, I mean, we can most definitely prove that Earth is getting hotter and hotter, and this is creating like several consequences, including, for instance, like, and I will provide examples and talk maybe later, but I mean, we can see it every day, for instance, on the number of extreme weather events that are happening more frequently, more ferociously. We can see it on the damages that we have to count on a daily basis, and on all these aspects of our daily lives, satellite information can support. And the actual overall solutions are becoming more and more powerful and are going to address more and more specific needs, because indeed of this cross-fertilization with other technologies, with ICT, but with artificial intelligence. Indeed, artificial intelligence is a very powerful way that is I mean, of course, supporting the process of those data, that is helping in providing new visualization ways. So indeed, what I was mentioning is that, for instance, virtual reality, augmented reality is part of the process, is entering to play a role in this picture by allowing, for instance, very easy, user-friendly visualization ways. So you have tools in which by changing some parameters, you have like a completely realistic visualization of what is happening in that specific scenario. So it's really helping communities like regulators, rather than, you know, like public authorities, to really understand what could happen in certain specific circumstances.
Perfect. John, what do you think? You're muted, John.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think what's interesting is the way there's this whole parallel field of artificial intelligence and semiconductors, which are being used to process this information and make predictions in really interesting ways. I think one that we could talk about a lot is just what NVIDIA is doing with what they're calling Earth 2. So, there's so many things just to unpack on that. But so Earth 2 is a digital twin of the Earth. And that's interesting to talk about, because it was really NASA that pioneered the idea. Oh, we got a video playing.
Predict and track severe storms like Super Typhoon Chanthu, which caused widespread damage in Taiwan and the surrounding region in 2021. Current AI forecast can accurately predict the track of storms, but they are limited to 25-kilometer resolution, which can miss important details. NVIDIA's CorDiff is a revolutionary new generative AI model trained on high-resolution, radar-assimilated WRF weather forecasts and ERA 5 reanalysis data. Using CorDiff, extreme events like Chanthu can be super-resolved from 25-kilometer to 2-kilometer resolution.
And Earth 2 is going on street level, John.
Yeah, well, so let's kind of talk about a couple of things from the video that you just raised. So first of all, digital twins were pioneered by NASA. It was first a concept that you could apply towards individual spacecraft, where you're like tracking all the variables associated with that spacecraft and essentially having a digital reproduction of everything that's going on with it. Well, you can keep scaling that up. You can go from a spacecraft size object to you could have a digital twin of a factory. Imagine like a robotic factory where you're tracking millions of variables, to what we call smart cities. You could track everything in a city. Think of all the traffic, the emergencies, like people walking around, temperatures, like all of that in a city. Well, you could scale it up to the entire planet. And that's what Earth 2 is. So Earth 2, as they were mentioning in that, is a higher level of resolution than climate models have used in the past. So Earth 2 operates at a 1 kilometer model. So there's about 500 million square kilometers on the Earth, and Earth 2 tries to bring them all together. The advantage of having it down to such a low level of resolution is you really get into not just the overall climate modeling, but how does that relate to the weather of individual locations on the Earth? So it means that you can look at things like ocean currents in a particular area, or the way specific terrain in a small area is affected by climate change and what kind of impacts that might have. And then you can simulate entire systems in it. So that's the objective of Earth 2. It uses a lot of really interesting technologies. So one of the technologies that it uses is generative AI, which you've been listening to anything about AI for the last couple of years, you've heard a lot about generative AI. So I think at this point, it's probably like 99.9% of the world has now used ChatGPT, or at least 99.9% of our audience. I'm going to actually say 100% of our audience has used ChatGPT. So you're using generative AI there, and that's using language models. If you've used any of the image generators like Midjourney or Stable Diffusion, then you've used something called a diffusion model. What is similar between both of those is that they use a technology called deep learning. And deep learning, without getting way down into the weeds here, is a learning process that uses calculus to look at many, many variables that are involved in predicting outcomes. And you can look at such an enormous number of variables simultaneously, and you can train and refine the model over time, that you end up with this neural network that makes interesting predictions, whether it's language or, in the case of image creation, the way these image generators work is that actually starts with random noise, and then it applies a denoiser algorithm to the noise. So it starts with this just gobbledygook, and it eventually ends up with this image that looks like, amazing art or even photograph level type things that you see in this. That's all because it applies this progressive denoiser, but the denoiser isn't just the normal denoiser that you might use in something like Adobe Photoshop. It's actually trained using this deep learning method. So why is this relevant to Earth 2? Well, diffusion models are applicable not only to things like art creation, but diffusion models can also be done for physical processes like those that exist in climate and weather. So the neat thing about Earth 2 is you've got this 1 kilometer scale, which gives you a level of detail which is unprecedented for these kind of systems. But also you can plug in different AI models like the diffusion models that I just described. So you can train those separately, plug them into the system, and see how that impacts things. And a third element of it is it has this whole, what we call data federation model, where you can flow data into the entire Earth 2 model. Again, this is kind of in the mindset of what a digital twin is. It's not just a simulation. You can pull data from all kinds of sources. So all the satellite information, for example, that Jim was just talking about, well, if you've got kilometer scale temperature readings of the entire Earth, you can send all that data right into this model and actually use real-time data or near real-time data to guide the way it can then make predictions. So it's the combination of AI acting off of these models. It's high resolution, now 1 kilometer resolution, plus the ability to synthesize all of this data in from all kinds of external databases and real-time data feeds.
All right. So we see it's getting exciting. I mean, even some of the things that we started doing with our virtual reality work, and I know we talked about it, what if you can look into these things in real time and walk into the storm and walk into the hurricanes and see where this is all going?
Also, if I may say something on this, I think that the very interesting part of all of this is that until some time ago we had like data sets, like separate data sets, satellite data, in situ data, as we call it, for instance, like the observations that we do at really ground level, or anyways like with some stations, like weather stations in some points. We had like I don't know, aviation imagery or aerial data, let's say. And what it's really important of all of this, it's the fact that this data federation concept, or the interoperability as we call it. So the fact that you can put different data sources into a system that is processing them and providing you with an actual result that is really readable and actionable for people that do not have like a very technical and scientific background. So I think that this is the actual revolution, the fact that you can predict something. So of course it provides you like this scenario-based sort of analysis, but from which you can draw like conclusions. So you can actually imagine like how this could be relevant for a public administration that needs to, very basically, build something on the city and just understand where, I don't know, some specific green area should be put in according to the specific temperature of the neighborhood. It's I think it's really like revolutionizing the way in which we are doing decision-making processes, in which we are informing the decisions of in many different.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So like I'm kind of combining that with this idea of Earth 2. It seems like urban design, like you could simulate, well, what happened if you're down to the 1 kilometer level? What happens if you put a 1 kilometer, park into a city? How does that impact things? Like that would actually give you some really interesting insights to the overall impact of not just that one space, but all the adjacent areas.
Yeah, indeed. From my perspective too, I saw that many of these scientists worked very closely together early on in the 90s and 80s and 90s to create physical-based models, understanding the physics of interactions between land, oceans, and atmospheres to create a prediction. What's happening, and they were reasonably successful. We still use those kind of models. They're all over the place. In fact, the track of hurricanes and where they're going to go, that not only cone of here's where they might go, but also which model is predicting which direction. We see major differences of that. And then it actually happens. Well, when you get the data from many of those, hundreds of those, all over a decade of climate data, you now can approach that problem differently based on the analysis of the data of the past, and then compare that against the physical models to determine, did you get the physics right? Is there something else going on that we didn't understand? And that's what's really critically important for us. The concept of climate and climate change here on Earth is spilling over also into other planets. We have a global circulation model of Mars. We take data in from many of our orbiters and repeaters, and we can create an understanding of temperature, pressure, and wind velocity everywhere on the surface of Mars, and then try to predict what will happen next. So we're seeing these kind of models begin the process of really giving us tremendous insights of not only this planet, but how we might be able to explore and land on other planets too. And the AI revolution is going to push that ahead in enormous ways.
I'm looking at an episode of obviously Star Trek. What else could it be? Which I'll be playing. And I don't know if you remember, Jim or John, there was an episode where they had a scene in Riser where the temperature grid just goes off the scales because someone starts to tamper with it. Do you think, with satellite technology, is that something that in the near future, Jim, you think that's something that we'll be able to do? Actually control the temperature?
Yes. this is a hot discussion. You know, the climate on this earth has done nothing but change. We've gone through enormous changes, and there's natural cycles. We need to understand what those natural cycles are to determine how that affects our analysis of the changing in the climate of today. That helps then us come to the realization maybe there's things that we can do that mitigate climate change. Well, one thing is plant more trees, remove more CO2. That's an action. Or take CO2 out of the atmosphere with various systems that are now coming online. Or I'd rather say, and reduce our overall carbon footprint and move towards more different types of technologies that don't end up increasing our CO2 production. And of course, that's linked quite closely to fossil fuels and the burning of fossil fuels. All those things begin the concept or the process of climate engineering. All right, the ability of really taking control of our climate and being able to say, these are the things that we're going to do, and these are the outcomes that we expect to have, and then see that that occurs. A lot of scientists don't like that idea for the simple reason the system is so complicated, we're not sure we're going to get the desired results if we do some massive messing around. You know, and I always said, hey, we ought to be looking at how we would do a variety of things in the climate area, but on different planets. One concept is terraforming Mars. How can we change the environment of Mars and warm it up? Okay, it has CO2, but it has such a small amount of CO2 in terms of the atmospheric pressure that it only heats up the planet by maybe 9 or 10 degrees Fahrenheit, not much. The CO2 and the water vapor here on Earth heat this planet by 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very important, or we'd be real cold. So we got to have it, but you know, how do we manage it? So concepts then of climate change, climate engineering rather, could actually start on another planet, and then we bring those ideas here to Earth as the next big step.
Now, certain kind of geoengineering things actually have been happening. First of all, quick anecdote. Stuart Brand, some people know him from the Whole Earth catalog from years ago, and but he's gotten much more involved in sort of promoting geoengineering solutions in more recent years. But I remember I was at TED about 5 years ago, and he stood up and talked about like putting some kind of powders into the atmosphere to decrease the amount of heat reaching the Earth. And Al Gore was also there, and he stood up and basically lambasted that, like we shouldn't be messing with the Earth in that way. But I think it's interesting because I don't know that we can not do some of those things personally, because they may be the only solutions at this point. But a country that actually has been actively doing this is China. Like for years, even decades, I believe China has been doing things like cloud seeding to increase rainfall in certain areas, either for agricultural reasons or because of the Beijing Olympics to make the weather nicer. So like that's a thing. And some of the technologies we've been talking about, like the combination of satellite monitoring plus flowing that into artificial intelligence models to predict the impact of that, could be something we could use to see like how that affects things, not only on a local basis, but if China does it's not if as China continues to do a lot of cloud seeding, what is the impact on other regions? Because I don't think you can make it rain in one place without decreasing the rain somewhere else. It is my understanding generally of how it might work. So some of these models can give you insight into that. You're muted.
Again, when we look at things like terraforming and what Jim talked about, what Annalisa talked about, and John, what you said. So we're talking about this, and a lot of it, at least for me, 10, 20 years ago, would have been sci-fi. It's only when you spend time in the industry and you realize actually it's more real than possible. So Annalisa, I'd love to know, when it comes to actually not just the people in this space, but the general public and communities. How are you reaching out to them for them to understand what kind of impact this has? And what do you think the gaps are in people understanding how much of an impact space has with weather? Because we all see the weather man or the weather lady or whoever to watch that, and we get the news, but how much, how much awareness? Because for me, one of the things I've realized with space is until there's mass adoption, just like you have that chat GPT moment, space is always going to be something that's there, but it's not, hey, it's not something I can connect with. So what do you think is missing, or what do you think we need to do to get this realization of how impactful and how close it is in our lives? And what are the challenges you've had with your organization in explaining that to the public?
I mean, that has been a very, very key question, honestly, for us. And I'm very also interested to hear maybe the NASA, let's say, counterpart, because we in Europe, at least, we have many challenges. I mean, reaching out, it might, like many people has like this NASA T-shirt, or they know about the, Falcon launch, or the, I don't know, like the very, very visible and sort of striking space stuff, the EVAs or these kind of things. But then when it comes to the daily lives, I mean, even the meteorological, prediction forecasts, that is something that indeed everybody's looking at, or even like the maps just to go around. I mean, who today doesn't use like a map to just go around? But you would be surprised that very, very few people know that this is enabled by space data. And when you talk them, I mean, when you mention that this is something like, without the space data, without the space component, this wouldn't exist. I mean, also the very, very famous, the taxi company that became incredibly successful because of the space component. Sometimes they do not even know that the business model changed entirely thanks to the space, component, the space data. Otherwise, it would have been another taxi company like all the others. So you really, really would be surprised. And so there is a lot to do. People, they do not know about space. I mean, sometimes I think that we have to take it on us in the sense that perhaps we've not been really great in communicating about the fact that space is really key and fundamental, in order to do this. I will just say myself, I mean, I am in the industry since about 10 years now. And, like the first day I joined ISU, the International Space University, something that really struck me a lot was when I think Scott Madry showed us a slide in which was like, what will happen with in a week without satellites? I mean, eventually it was apocalypse. So this is how it ended up. But I mean, even for me, it was like, wow. I mean, I did not know that, honestly, so many different things were basically enabled by space. So there's still a lot to do. People do not know it very well. And what it's also something that we realize is that sometimes there is a sort of skepticism towards science. So many people are like, oh no, space. I mean, what is this space? It's too difficult to engineering thingy. We don't want to hear about that. And, thanks to many of the success stories that you've been showing earlier, just showing that actually, and also thanks to other technologies like AI, like this old visualization tool, the possibility of, and also something I wanted to mention is Jim said action. Action is key in the sense that we need to be able to give them something that allow them to take concrete actions. So many people that are not in the space field, that are not engineers, they do not necessarily care about the indicators, the physics which is behind, a certain kind of information. They want to have the information. They want to know, like, how can I use this? So it's to make a concrete action is important to give them like also actionable information that can be processed by people without a specific background. So this is a little bit like the direction where we're going, the challenges that we faced. But also it's very important because without being supported by voters, politicians, or decision makers, they do not allow for additional research, which is basically where all of this comes from. So it's a little bit of a circle. Everything is connected. So we should start from the people to be able also to build the case for space at different levels.
So we talked about science fiction a moment ago, so I thought I'd just throw out another recommendation on the science fiction front. So there's a wonderful book that I enjoyed called Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. Now, Kim Stanley Robinson is probably best known for some novels he wrote about Martian colonization. So I was a teenager when I read his book, Red Mars, and then he wrote Blue Mars and Green Mars. I forget exactly which order those colors were in, but I think green was second, and then blue is the third because of oceans. But so he is a scientist and knows a lot about these subjects, and particularly planetary engineering and stuff. He writes a lot about terraforming in the Mars trilogy. But this is much more recent. I think it's very recent, like only a couple of years ago.
Right.
So it's got everything from changes to the currency system so that we have cryptocurrency based money that accounts for things that would actually be, the pros and cons of doing various investments today that impact the world in the long term, to all kinds of geoengineering, to many other kind of crazy things. I won't give away the plot, but check out this book if you love science and you just want to hear. I will tell you, this book is sort of lightly plotted, but every chapter is almost like reading a essay on a different idea around climate change. It's pretty neat stuff. Anyway, that's my science fiction plug for today.
Well, I thought we should ask ChatGPT and maybe Claude what his opinions was and how it's going to actually. So I asked her the question, how do you see yourself playing a role in climate change and space? And it came with a whole bunch of things. It talked about climate change specifically, data analysis and predictions. It talked about raising awareness, supporting green technology development and decision making. I have to say Claude was probably a bit more humble. It said, I don't directly impact climate change or space exploration. However, I can play a supportive role. And it talked about climate change and space. But John, I'd love to know AI agents. How do you see them playing a bigger role? I mean, pretty much there's so much they can do regardless. But as the technology gets better, you've seen a new version of GPT 1.0, or whatever it's called now, Strawberry or whatever it is. It changes every week. But and then Meta, of course, announced their new AI-based platform, which has been upgraded. So, I mean, you're seeing it. You're in the gaming world. You're seeing these things happen every week. Like, where do you see the AI agents playing a role with some of this stuff?
I guess we should define what an AI agent is first, because we don't really have too many AI agents. There are companies working on that, and certainly some people are using a version of an AI agent. When you go to ChatGPT, that's not really an agent. That's a chat session with a language model where you are having like a collaborative process of building up text and narrative and whatever. And it's super useful. It's not always 100% accurate, but it's getting more accurate all the time. It's essentially synthesizing massive amounts of data and content that's on the internet, including multimodal content, so it can understand even conceptually like what images mean and how that relates back to textual descriptions. And it's kind of the replacement of the search engine. So in the past, we found information by searching. Now we're going to increasingly find information and surface information through language models and other generative models. Now, an agent takes that to the next level, in that an agent is sort of a version of that works for you, meaning it starts to learn a lot of information very specific to you and your interests and your own preferences. So a true agent, rather than kind of being trained on a set of biases that the trainers thought was important for it, might be a little bit more biased towards you and what your interests are and your own well-being and your goals. So an agent, ideally is something that operates as a piece of software on your device that you can tell it to go carry out things for you. And as an agent, it could go and do things like order things, find information, work with other software, use the responses from that software, reincorporate it into what you're doing. And it could, again, ideally work even with your private data, everything from things it knows about your health, sensitive information, financial information, all of that, but keep it separate from these chat systems that exist online. Because when you go to a chat system like ChatGPT or Claude, which we were showing earlier, anything you put into that goes up into their cloud and they can do anything they want with it. They'll tell you that they'll keep it private. And I mostly believe them. I don't think they're in the business of like revealing all the things that you said in your chat session, but that information is no longer yours after it goes out into their systems. And you may want to think about that. An agent could have that information be held privately and essentially fine tune the models that you're using to get responses so that the fine tuning of those models is more local to you as opposed to going out over the internet with a cloud-based API where you're inserting that information into someone else's database, so to speak, and then having it work with that data externally. So agents are going to be all about your data, your own preference, and also just directing them to carry out a sequence of events. So it may not just be giving you research about a subject. You might say something like, help me figure out how to make an investment in space, for example, and find the thing that you think is the highest return. And here's $1,000. Go just invest it for me. Like that's what an agent will be able to do in the future.
Is it true that the agents would run on your local computer where you have control over the information? And that then it would also interact with ChatGPT or Claude or many of the other systems to gain information that then compares with what it has about you and your approaches and your thoughts, and then presents you with some of those solutions.
Ideally, yes. I don't think it's a strict requirement of a quote unquote agent for it to operate only locally. Like you could build agentic systems that exist online with cloud-based APIs where it doesn't do that, Jim. But this is sort of, for me, one of the things that's really important in the trends between what we might call open source or open models versus the closed models. So ChatGPT is a closed AI model, is an example of a closed AI model. Nobody other than people working at OpenAI have access to the weights of that model or fully understand how it was trained and so forth. So you don't ever interact with that model directly. You interact with a chat session that talks to computers at OpenAI, and those computers then interact with the models. So the benefit of these more open models, for example, the one that Meta has been working on is called Llama, and they keep releasing new versions of this. The Llama model could actually be downloaded to your computer so that instead of having the software gateway in between you and the model actually runs on your computer. So you can do inference directly against that model. So an advantage of that now is, number one, any of the inference that you do is completely private to you. You're not sharing what those inferences are. No one will know what questions you're asking to the extent that you care about that. But ultimately, if you've got the model locally, you could also be fine-tuning it and having it work with a body of data and knowledge that's specific to you. And one basic way to do that, by the way, even without getting into changing the model or fine-tuning it, just populate the prompts of those models with things that are specific to you. So when you go to ChatGPT or these text-based APIs, what you're doing is when you supply a question, that's the prompt, okay? And that prompt, though, could include lots of other data about you. You could, if you wanted to, give it a whole multi-paragraph description saying, here's my question, but by the way, here's some background information, something I've actually done may or may not be a great idea, but I do it, is like, here's all of the reports and blood tests and you name it that I've ever gotten from all my doctors, and I just dump that on ChatGPT, and I'm like, give me your analysis. What do you think? What should I do differently in my life? And it gives me pretty good response. Now, I'm crazy, and probably most people won't want to do that, but
talk about getting a second opinion. Wow.
Yeah, well, for the people that aren't crazy like me, the way that you'll probably do that in the future is run a model locally, and all of these documents that are very sensitive health information, for example, could be stored locally. It could analyze that information locally, and then as it kind of synthesizes that information and learns about you, that could be embedded into the prompts that you continue to access. So every time you go back, it like already knows like what your blood pressure and your recent cholesterol, or like whatever that those data points are, would be there, so that it has this learning process where the facts are collected about you, but it will be private because it's on your device. Now, of course, now we depend on how private is it really, which will be dependent upon the particular operating system you use and how focused that operating system company is to that issue. I'd say Apple is probably more attendant to the privacy concerns than most, but others might not be. So that said, like this is the most important thing about AI models to me, which is having more and more open source models that could just run on your own device, so that you're not dependent on third parties running these big inference engines in the cloud, which then end up needing to consume all of your private data and preferences to make use of it. I think that's got to be something that runs on device. So long answer to your question, but that is the way it should go in the ideal world.
I just want to say one thing about that, and then we should transition to our next thoughts about future climate. But once we crack much more of the understanding of individual genes that make up our DNA, and determine what's active and what's not, and what we can activate and what we can anticipate our body responses. There are genes that can help us cool down, can allow us to evolve into being able to withstand a hotter environment that must have happened, or a colder environment. That's what's called evolution. The concept of having that kind of level of information then is stored, which is an enormous amount of information, these kind of things can do in the future. So getting a second opinion, it might actually be the best thing in the future to do with an AI agent.
There was a story from a year or two ago about a mother who had a child who was suffering some kind of health condition, and she'd been to like 30 plus doctors and had never gotten a diagnosis. And she kind of did what I did, just dumped all the information she had, and ChatGPT came back with a idea of what it might be. And she used that information, found a doctor that specialized in that, and ended up getting a positive diagnosis. Wow. Based on that. So I do think that like there's an incredible uplift on the value of our time, the ability to reach good decisions. Again, you have to treat this thing as imperfect. Okay. That's the main thing. Like, don't treat it as an authority.
It's input.
Think of it as a friend who might have some good ideas for you, and then you can go and check it out on your own, and find the experts that have the actual knowledge and see if it checks out. But I think that it's going to radically, exponentially increase the value of our time as we do these things. And the thing that I was reminded of, Jim, based on what you were just describing, is sure, second opinions, but also learning. One of the big applications of AI and language models specifically is just going to be teaching people things. So language models can kind of refine their way of communication and teaching on an individualized basis, so that it's much more geared towards the learning preferences of the individual, the current knowledge that individual has. So that could be used to help people become educated about any topic, of course, climate change being an important one. You can even make it contextual to them, help them understand the impact that it has specific to themselves.
Well, the bottom line is, as the climate does change, I think as we work on a global level to do some mitigation or create a variety of mitigation strategies, in the long run, we're going to have to learn to live in a hotter world. And we're going to have to be able to take full advantage of that. What that would be and how that would be, I don't know. But these are things that have to be considered well into the future. We're not going to have a climate of the 50s, 1950s, when I was born in that era, ever in my lifetime. Okay. And whether we go back there or not, in the future requires so much knowledge and our ability to engineer the climate in the right way once we understand the total physics of what's going on in this complicated system of interactions.
Annalisa, what do you think?
Well, actually, before I unmuted myself because I wanted to ask to John if he believes that basically this kind of agent will be able to make my grocery in the future. And afterward, I realized that, wow, yes, for sure. Like grocery is like basics minor. All indeed great. I work in this field. I consider myself like a space geek. I for sure believe that technology will drive the change for the best. It needs to be, regulated. We need to do also some human thinking possibly around these old developments. But I hope that those scenarios that have been described will be reality, maybe not even in my time span though. So.
You said regulation. I'm extremely wary of regulation. I'm not in favor of AI regulation, actually. So that could be an interesting debate in the future.
It will.
14th of October, we're doing a tech conference in the UK. For some reason, the UK did not invite Elon Musk. It's all over news. We're talking about it. You might want to see. We ended up not inviting him for whatever reason. But there is a tech event, and they're talking about regulation.
Well, we didn't put Caitlin Clark on the Olympic team either. Things happen like that.
Yeah, regulation will be an extremely effective way to push all of the R&D to Saudi, Dubai, Singapore, all the places that are not going to regulate. So good, have fun with that. I don't think it's going to happen, but
yeah,
EU may well exclude itself from this industry.
Yeah.
Right, so we're coming to the top of the hour. So final comments, and then I have made a new song for you, Annalisa. Whilst we were doing this, we created one, and would love your thoughts. But yeah, final comments, everybody. What do you think?
Well, my final comment would be, I am so delighted we're in an era for which our space assets are so comprehensive and are continuing on our ability to observe the world and have the data available that allow us to make decisions, not only from a scientific point of view, understanding the physics, but observations are necessary to do the right policies. Whether our politicians make the right decisions based on that data or not, ends up being part of our individual countries and cultures around the world. Hopefully that data of the world helps knit everyone together and recognizes that what happens in the United States affects the world, what happens in China affects the world, what happens in Europe affects the world. And therefore, we need to start thinking about being part of the world.
All right, John.
So my closing comment is related to AI. So, in the past, we've talked about that a lot of people have gotten hung up on this idea of existential risk from artificial intelligence, like it's going to spawn a bunch of Terminators and somehow harness infinite energy and perpetual motion machines to spew out killbots or something against us. The real existential risks we've been talking about. I mean, we've been talking about one of them during this conversation. I mean, climate change could present real existential risks, or at least massive change to humans. One of the best tools that we have right now to face the actual existential risks is artificial intelligence to help us find pathways to solutions there. So you have to accelerate AI and make sure that we have access to these technologies, because the problems that we're up against are vast, and it's not just climate change, it's many, many, many things. And I actually wrote an article about this, let's see, about a year ago, over a year ago. It's called Existential Threats and Artificial Intelligence Solutions. And I talked about how climate change and nuclear proliferation and geopolitics and all, a lot of the major existential risks people talk about actually could, AI isn't a silver bullet, but it could be very, very helpful in working our way towards solutions for many of these.
If you haven't watched it already, watch Star Trek Discovery and look at the episodes on control. It will literally hyper fire you towards a lot of conspiracy theories. So for those of you looking for Terminators, go there. Annalisa.
Sorry, but I mean, my final thought is that indeed space contributed to just showcase that climate change is undeniable. I mean, its phases, as we mentioned, still seems that the anthropomorphic support that to the faster change of the climate, it's also real. And I think that we are now space assets and other technologies as AI, and they are really they're developed. It's up to us to use them for the different purposes that Jim was mentioning, like for not only to better understand the physics, but also to take actual decision and actions in certain policies that can help the planet. Because I mean, of course, space exploration, it's important, it's key. We need to go on Mars, we need to send our orbiters around Jupiter, but for the time being, this is the only planet that is livable for us. So, there's no planet B.
All right. So great session, great conversation. We should do a session on AI regulation, John, especially before the 14th of October. Now that you pointed it out there, we sent our Prime Minister over to you guys, and we're there right now, and so we've decided to call you guys back here to the UK. Yeah, Annalisa, you're of course welcome to the conference on the 14th. But saying all that, John's got something to show here. There you go. That's the article.
That's the article if anyone wants to search on that and kind of read about how AI can be applied towards some of these existential risks that we've been talking about: nuclear war, pandemics, biotechnology, climate change, asteroid impacts, super volcanoes. Doesn't particularly help with gamma ray burst, but there are actually AI applications that can be super helpful in all of these. Check that out. And I'd love it. It sounds great. Like I'll show up at 10 Downing. I'll debate the Prime Minister if we'd like to do that on.
No, we're actually we're open. We are very open to having lots of discussions. So feel free to come down anytime. We've got to build like 2 million houses, and if AI can help us, that'll be great. So with that said, Jim, thank you so much. John, Annalisa. Now, Annalisa, like I said, we for those of you who watch, I'm going to credit Sooner.ai because that's the app I used to create this song. It's called Eyes on Earth. I have to say, GPT helped me create lyrics. We put these lyrics into there, and I even asked GPT, hey, what should it even sound like? Like, what should be the theme and the music? And it came up with everything. So we will play this song. So for those of you who feel that you don't have talent, everybody has talent, because if I can make it, you can definitely make it.
Rise above the clouds, see the world anew. Remote sensing in our hands, showing all that's true. From the deserts to the seas, the forests and the skies, we watch the planet change through artificial eyes. Digital twins, they build the earth again, a mirror to the world where we can mend the pain. AI lights the way, guiding what we see, helping us to heal.
Not bad, right? Pretty much for everything covered: digital twins, remote sensing, AI. You know, we got quite a bit covered. So again, we're building a portfolio of these. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for everybody
you.
watching, and looking forward to catching up again. Good night.
Take care.